America saw the perfect Kennedy marriage. The environmental crusader, his elegant architect wife, 4 children, and a showcase green home she designed in Bedford, New York. On May 16, 2012, Mary Richardson Kennedy was found dead in the barn behind that house, hanged, according to the Westchester County Medical Examiner, in the middle of a bitter divorce. Weeks later, a sealed 60-page affidavit written by her husband surfaced in the press, and her family called it character assassination. 2 months after her funeral, her body was quietly dug up and reburied 700 feet away. Her siblings say nobody told them. It began with a wedding on a boat. April 15, 1994. A research vessel on the Hudson River. The same river Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had built his environmental reputation defending. The ceremony was small. No cathedral, no crowd of senators. Mary Richardson was 6 months pregnant. Robert's divorce from his first wife, Emily Black, had been finalized only 3 weeks earlier. For a woman marrying into the most photographed family in American politics, it was a strangely quiet way to become a Kennedy. But Mary would have understood exactly how quiet it was, because she'd spent nearly 20 years watching how Kennedy weddings were supposed to look, from the inside. That's the detail most retellings skip, and it changes everything about what came after. Mary didn't meet Bobby Kennedy Jr. at a fundraiser. She met the family at 15, when Carrie Kennedy, Bobby's younger sister, became her roommate at the Putney School in Vermont. The 2 girls were, by every account, inseparable. Mary spent school vacations at Hickory Hill, Ethel Kennedy's Virginia estate. She roomed with Carrie again at Brown University and later served as her maid of honor. By the time she married Bobby in 1994, she had been part of the family's rhythms for 2 decades. Mary came from a large Irish Catholic family in Hoboken, New Jersey, one of 7 children. Her father, a law professor, died when she was 12, a loss that friends and biographers consistently describe as a wound that never closed. At Putney, she reportedly struggled with an eating disorder. What emerges from the record is a gifted, disciplined young woman who attached herself early to a family that offered structure, glamour, and belonging that her own grief-shadowed household couldn't. She built a real career in the meantime. Mary trained as an architectural designer, worked at Parrish Hadley, the storied firm that had decorated rooms in the Kennedy White House, and was, by colleagues' accounts, genuinely talented. Her professional world, her social world, and her emotional world all ran through the same family. That matters, because when this marriage eventually went to war, Mary had almost no ground to stand on that the Kennedys didn't also own. Bobby, meanwhile, arrived at 1993 mid-reinvention. A heroin addiction had nearly ended his life, culminating in a 1983 arrest. His court-ordered community service put him on the Hudson River, where he remade himself as an environmental litigator, the public face of Riverkeeper. By the early 90s, he was arguably the most promising Kennedy of his generation. He was also still married to Emily Black, with 2 young children, when he and Mary reconnected at a New York art gallery in 1993. Mary became pregnant before his divorce was final. The boat wedding followed weeks after the divorce closed. Their son Connor was born that July. There's one more piece of Catholic machinery worth remembering, because it echoes at the end of this story. Bobby pursued a church annulment of his first marriage, the process that declares a marriage void in the eyes of the church. For a devout Catholic family, undoing a 12-year marriage with 2 children was procedure, not scandal. Mary, herself a devout Catholic, watched her own wedding become possible partly because a marriage could be administratively erased. She likely didn't dwell on what that precedent might one day mean for her own. The first years produced what first years like this usually produce: momentum. 4 children in 7 years, Connor in 1994, Kira in 1995, Finn in 1997, Aiden in 2001. Summers at Hyannis Port, the family compound where image management is practically a house rule. Mary had watched that system as a guest. Now she lived inside it, and the system had a job waiting for her. That job became the house. The couple settled in Bedford, in Westchester County, and Mary spent years converting the property into a showcase of sustainable design. Geothermal wells, reclaimed materials, solar arrays, engineered to demonstrate that luxury and environmental responsibility could coexist. She also co-founded the Food Allergy Initiative, the largest food allergy research fund in the country, after her son Connor developed severe allergies. The press loved the pairing. He fought polluters in court. She built the sustainable home of the future. But look at what that meant for her, specifically. Her independent career, her own clients, her own name, had folded into an unpaid extension of her husband's public mission on a property tied to his family, in a marriage witnessed by his relatives. She had no salary and no separate territory. The house was the marriage. When the marriage ended, that's where it ended too. Here the public story and the private record start to diverge. And unusually, the divergence comes not from a rival or an anonymous source, but from Robert Kennedy Jr.'s own handwriting. In 2001, Bobby kept a private journal, later 3 volumes, running to nearly 400 pages for that year alone. According to reporting the New York Post published in 2013, a year after Mary's death, the journal recorded his day-to-day activities alongside a coded record of extramarital affairs. Dates, women's names, and numbers from 1 to 10 that Mary reportedly told a confidant referred to specific sexual acts. Alongside the ledger, Kennedy wrote at length about what he called his lust demons and his guilt over infidelity. The record of a man cataloging his own failures with the diligence of a bookkeeper who hated the books but kept them anyway. Kennedy has never publicly authenticated the diary, so the specifics deserve appropriate caution. But its texture, the tedium of dates and codes and guilt spirals, reads less like something a tabloid invents than something a person actually wrote. By most accounts, Mary herself found the journal in 2011, in the middle of the divorce, and reportedly kept it as leverage. She never got the chance to use it. The Post didn't publish it until 2013. Whether or when Mary first suspected infidelity earlier in the marriage, the record can't say with precision. What the record does show is what the 2000s did to her. Friends interviewed by Kennedy biographer Lawrence Leamer for a 2012 Newsweek cover story, and sources gathered later by other biographers, describe a long deterioration, deepening depression, drinking that escalated from social to serious, cycles of treatment and relapse, multiple rounds of failed marriage counseling. The record here isn't simple. People close to the family describe Mary in her worst moments as volatile and, at times, frightening, accounts that would later be weaponized. People close to Mary described a woman being worn down by a husband who was chronically unfaithful and largely absent, while she raised 4 children and ran his showcase home. Both things can be true at once. The rupture, when it came fast and in public. On May 12, 2010, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. filed for divorce. 3 days later, Mary was arrested in Bedford for driving while intoxicated. That August, she was arrested again, this time on a charge involving prescription medication that was later reduced. 2 arrests in one summer, and in a custody fight, every arrest is an exhibit. She didn't spiral and then get served divorce papers. She was served, and the spiral, or at least its public prosecutable version, followed. Friends told Leamer she was blindsided by the filing and, for a long stretch, still hoped the marriage could be saved. Meanwhile, the practical ground kept shifting under her. According to Newsweek's reporting, sourced to her friends and family, her credit cards were cut off during the litigation. and a woman living in a multi-million-dollar estate found herself functionally broke. She had no independent income. She'd given her career to the house. Why didn't she simply leave and start over? 4 children were at stake, and Bobby was seeking custody. Her Catholic faith made divorce itself feel like defeat, and she had already watched the church annul a 12-year first marriage, which meant she understood exactly how completely a Kennedy union could be erased once the family decided it should be. There were stretches through 2010 and 2011 when things looked like they might stabilize. Treatment, periods of calm, cautious hope. Then, in 2011, Robert Kennedy Jr.'s lawyers filed a sworn affidavit in the custody case, roughly 60 pages long, and sealed by the court. In it, Kennedy accused Mary of physical violence toward him, including, he claimed, punching him in the face, and of abusive treatment of his children from his first marriage. He asked the court to bar her from threatening suicide in front of the children and to require her sobriety. A 2025 Mother Jones report, drawing on newly surfaced audio, found that Kennedy had also secretly recorded conversations with Mary during this period and used those recordings to help build the affidavit. Mary, the same report indicated, drafted a point-by-point rebuttal, denying most of the allegations while admitting she'd once struck him in anger, but never filed it. She died before she got the chance. The affidavit sat sealed until roughly 3.5 weeks after Mary's death, when portions were published online by the Daily Beast alongside a Newsweek cover story. At the exact moment she could no longer answer a single line of it, the public's defining account of who she was became the sworn narrative written by the man she was divorcing. No one has ever been publicly identified as the source of the leak. Mary's family called it a brutal psychological weapon, used in their words even after her death. The funeral came first, on May 19th, at St. Patrick's Church in Bedford, a full Kennedy production with Ethel Kennedy, extended family, and celebrity friends including Glenn Close, Susan Sarandon, and Larry David in attendance. Bobby delivered the eulogy. Carrie Kennedy told reporters outside that Mary had battled depression and mental illness for years but loved her children deeply. That evening, Mary was buried at St. Francis Xavier Cemetery in Centerville, Massachusetts, near the family's Hyannisport compound, placed, in death, inside the geography she'd orbited since she was 15. Her siblings had gone to court trying to have her buried near her children in Westchester instead, and lost. Then, that July, about 7 weeks after the funeral, her body was exhumed and reburied roughly 700 feet away, in a more spacious, isolated section of the same cemetery. According to reporting at the time, the required exhumation permit had not been filed with local authorities. A gravedigger told the New York Daily News that Robert Kennedy Jr. wanted her moved to an area where the family was negotiating to buy additional plots. The Richardsons said they weren't told beforehand and learned about the move only after it happened. Understand what that act represented in the architecture of this marriage. For 18 years, control had run through Bobby. The income, the family, the lawyers, the sworn narrative of who Mary was in the end. The exhumation extended that control past the point where it's supposed to stop. Even her resting place was his decision. By most accounts, the two families have not spoken since. Bobby's life moved on. In 2014, 2 years after Mary's death, he married actress Cheryl Hines at the family compound in Hyannisport. In 2013, the Post had already published the journal excerpts. In 2015, biographer Jerry Oppenheimer revisited the marriage in a critical book. For years, the affidavit's version of Mary, the version filed in a custody war and released while she couldn't respond, dominated how she was remembered. That balance shifted unexpectedly when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. ran for president in 2023 and 2024, and then became U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services in 2025. Renewed scrutiny of his biography brought Mary's story back into view, including, in 2025, the Mother Jones reporting on the secret recordings and her unfiled rebuttal. Journalist Maureen Callahan's 2024 book, Ask Not, which examined women harmed across generations of Kennedy men, made Mary's case one of its central chapters, reframing the affidavit not as evidence about her, but as an example of a pattern. Inconvenient women recast as unstable once they became liabilities. It's an openly adversarial book, and its framing can be argued with, but its effect was concrete. A decade after a sealed document defined how Mary was remembered, a counter record existed. The record still won't settle everything. Whether Bobby loved her in whatever compromised way he was capable of, whether every incident in that affidavit happened as sworn, whether different choices, at different points, could have changed the outcome, the surviving evidence can't close those questions, and the people who could answer them have every reason to answer selectively. What the record does establish is the shape of it. A woman gave a family 38 years, a marriage 18 of them, 4 children, and her entire professional life. When the marriage ended, nearly every institution around it, the money, the lawyers, the church that could annul a prior marriage, the press that received a sealed filing, the cemetery plot that could be quietly changed, answered to one side. Go back to where this started. The greenhouse in Bedford, the magazine spreads, the crusader and his architect wife modeling a sustainable future. That house was real. And Mary really built it with real talent. It was also, without either of them intending it that way, the fullest record she ever left of a life converted almost entirely into someone else's public story. She died 100 feet behind it, in the middle of litigation, 7 weeks before her body was moved to a plot she never chose, by a husband she was in the process of divorcing, without a word to the family she came from. The wedding was on his river. The house became his brand. The affidavit was his sworn account. The eulogy was his. The choice of where she'd finally rest, twice, was his. For 18 years of marriage, and more than a decade since, one side controlled almost every telling, which is the plainest way of saying it. For a long time, only one of them was allowed to speak.